Just again, Steve does such a brilliant job sort of standing in the breach between what I understand from covering Donald Trump almost every day for 9 years and what I'm trying to understand about how the global economy is reacting to a completely sort of uninhibited and really a silo in Donald Trump. He's not a part of any White House policy process at his own White House. Help me understand what that means for our economy.
Well, I think the scary thing for the U.S. economy and the global economy was not that Donald Trump showed up as tariff man. He's often talked about that. It was that it was not done in any strategic or coherent way. It was kind of a flat earth tariff man. And I think when people saw the formula, they saw the kind of amateur hour of that. It wasn't just the, extraordinarily high numbers, but just the lack of any coherent justification. And I think what started to happen over 3 or 4 days was the administration reached its pain point on several levels. The pain point of people getting their 401k statements and seeing they maybe had 15, 20% less than they did in December. The pain point of hearing recession estimates going from 10% to 2030 to over 60% to people like JP Morgan saying they're more likely. And then this kind of loss of consumer confidence and job approval, which is bad for the economy, but also saps a president's power. And you could feel Republicans starting to stand up to him. So I think when you had this bond crisis, it wasn't that he only cares about the bond market, and it wasn't that it was a master plan to get there. It was kind of the final straw and a little bit of an off-ramp for the president to say, I've reached my pain point. I have to stop the bleeding. And you rightly noted that they started at first with the, oh, no, this is all part of the plan, master plan, brilliant negotiator. And then they kind of started to embrace later, no, Trump was being sophisticated and talking with the Secretary of Treasury about the potential failures on the bond market. Whatever it was the final straw. And I think, as Steve said, what happened was there was a sense of relief. It was suddenly a rational move. There was more discussion that he might be relying more on his Secretary of Treasury. And that all kind of gave the market, a sense of relief at first. And they overreacted yesterday. And they kind of woke up in the morning and realized that this level of tariff is still higher than we had all thought and analyzed over the campaign when we thought it would be 10% across the board and 60% for China. Now it's 10% across the board, 25% in sectors, and 145% for China. And Yale Budget Lab comes out and says, this could still cost the average family $2,700 to $4,700. And my last point, which really goes to what Steve says, but I want to put an exclamation up on it, is uncertainty. Uncertainty sounds like a vague term, but when you have uncertainty at every level in the economy, when it's consumers who don't know what to do or what to buy or whether to go on vacation or build the kitchen, when it's small businesses who likewise don't know whether to hire or fire or expand, when it's large businesses who don't know whether to locate, and investors who don't know whether they should be going to bonds or cash or market, you get all that uncertainty together. If everybody simply pauses at the same time, you start having that stagflationary effect, where growth is going down from the slowdown of everybody pausing, but inflation is expected to go up because of the tariffs, and that freezes the Federal Reserve. And that, I think, is the very bad situation that we are still in today, and that the market, with a fresh cup of coffee, woke up to and realized.
So, Tyler, you guys have the receipts on all of this, on the reporting on how this went down, and the TikTok and the 4, 5, 6 sources telling this backstory. What's most remarkable is how different Bessent and Lutnick are from Mnuchin and Gary Cohn. Just talk about the lack of anyone around Trump who can influence Trump.
Yeah, I think that's what we saw play out over the last several weeks when the president announced he was going to go forward with this. And Nicole, I think it's important to note that it should be no surprise that the president wanted to instigate a trade war. He wanted to institute high tariffs across the board. He's talked extensively about this. But when he was getting closer to it, as we report in that story, numerous aides went to him, including Lutnick, to try to get him to do a more tailored approach. They wanted him to, focus on isolating China and not create global economic turmoil. That clearly didn't work. And after he made that announcement on so-called Liberation Day, aides continued to try to get him to shape and shift the response somewhat. They were unsuccessful in doing so. And I think a key moment in this sort of reversal is on Sunday. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, goes on Meet the Press and then hops on a commercial flight and flies down to Florida to get a private audience with the president to make the case directly to him and talk about the path forward. One of the things that he made clear to the president in speaking his language was to, tout his deal-making abilities. He said to him, "You're a great negotiator. Focus on the negotiations, and that will give the market some stability and some certainty that there's a path out of this." One of the big things, as Gene was just talking about, is this uncertainty in the market because people don't know what Trump's long-term goal is. And I think one of the things we're seeing today is even though he's reversed on most of these reciprocal tariffs, it's only for a 90-day window. And a lot of these trade deals that these countries are interested in making with the president and the administration are very complicated. They don't happen overnight. They don't even happen over weeks. It takes months and months of negotiations. So I think there's some trepidation that this could all start over again in a matter of months because it's going to take some time for these trade deals to hammer out. But I think ultimately what we saw and what we know about President Trump is that the market is still a guardrail for him and his decision-making process. He has a higher appetite for risk when it comes to market losses than he did in his first term. But as we saw the market continue to spiral, particularly as it relates to the Treasury yields, he did decide to act. But it took a lot more time and a lot more persuasion from a lot more people than it would have 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Do you know who the White House hasn't mentioned caring about Tim O'Brien? The forgotten man and woman.
Right. The average American consumer. Even though Bessent said on Monday, we don't care about Wall Street, we care about Main Street. Everything they've been doing actually hurts both groups. And at the top of the show, you had this note that when people asked how Trump would approach this, Trump said instinctively. That should strike terror, I think, into the hearts of citizens, observers, anyone watching this play out, because Donald Trump's instincts are predatory. They're not constructive. And predatory works on the campaign trail. Predatory works when you're in business deals. It doesn't work when you're a leader. We want leaders, regardless of ideology or party, to be constructive. And he's not constructive. He doesn't look for constructive solutions to complex problems. That bores him. What he looks for most of the time is either self-aggrandizement or self-preservation. And he's now opened this Pandora's box around tariffs that regardless of what they do in terms of drawing it down, and I suspect over the next 90 days that they might even try to soften the tariff rates even further and sort of allow him to back out of this without proving or demonstrating that he's caved. But we already have a real world example of what happens when a country does this, and it's Brexit. In 2016, the UK turned its back on the rest of Europe and said, we don't need to trade with you. We can go our own way politically and economically. And it did enormous lasting damage to the British economy that they're still living with. They don't have enough workers in hotels. They don't have enough workers in restaurants. Their trade balances are askew, and their economy has been anemic because of it. And the United States, through Donald Trump, has introduced Brexit times 1,000.
Yeah.
And it hurts the U.S.'s reputation globally. People want predictability. They want to be able to plan. People in the business community want to know that interest rates will be in a certain range, that investments will produce a certain return in order to keep going about their business. And consumers want the same kind of certainty. They want to know whether it makes sense to buy a car or a house or food or clothing. And if they don't, if both of those camps decide that all of this is so unpredictable and unhinged that they stop spending to just protect their own money, 70% of the US GDP is created by consumer spending. That is what drives that. So when consumers seize, the economy seizes. And you can't just put that genie back in the bottle once it's out in the world. And I think today, when you saw the market plunge again, you know, the market is a barometer in the short term of almost nothing except people's emotions and their instincts.
I'm learning that, yeah.
Yes, and people are afraid now.
Yeah.
And that's what this market is saying. And this is going to have knockoff effects for a very long time, maybe for years, if not decades. And I think this administration is going to be hard pressed to unravel what they just rolled out.